Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 2026 Progress Report on Arizona's Bioscience Roadmap. I'm Jennifer Barton, Chair of the Roadmap Steering Committee. Last September, the Flinn Foundation and SRI International released the new Arizona's Bioscience Roadmap, following a full year of development that involved research and listening about what Arizona needs, including conversations with many of you, so thank you for your input. The roadmap is a long-term plan for growing the state's bioscience sector. It identifies more than a dozen strategies under 5 goals to help Arizona become a nationally recognized rising biosciences leader. Each year, Flinn hosts a progress report event like this one and publishes a written report on developments in the sector. You can find the roadmap and this new report at flinn.org and with the QR codes listed. Every other year, the progress report takes a deep dive into the latest data. This is not our data year, so only some of the figures we have are fresh, such as the record highs in research funding. These are real accomplishments, and they happened in a time of real uncertainty with respect to federal funding, trade, and industrial policy, and how fast technology is reshaping what's possible. So we've organized this hour around 2 questions. What's happening in the research landscape and what's happening in industry. So to take on the first question, Tammy McLeod, President and CEO of the Flinn Foundation, will be in conversation with Setharaman Panchanathan, or Panch, as many of us know him, who served as the 15th director of the National Science Foundation and is now back at Arizona State University. Tammy and Panch, over to you.
Good morning, and thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that. Panch, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Likewise, Tammy, great to be here, and Jennifer, great to see you too.
Yeah, and welcome back to Arizona. That's a highlight for all of us, I know.
Delighted to be back home.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about where you have been. You left your role as NSF director in April of 2025, and that was sort of a tumultuous period for a lot of federal scientific agencies. So what's your assessment of how the instability has impacted American scientific research?
Tammy, the first thing I would say is, first of all, thank you to Flinn Foundation. I mean, you've been an exemplar in terms of advancing, initiatives. I mean, this is a very, very important thing. We'll talk about this hopefully later in our conversation at a macro scale and bringing in the partnerships across the state. Having been part of that before I left for NSF, congratulations on all the amazing things that's happening because of that. To your question specifically, yes, there is a redefinition, if you may, of how funding is going to be, provided for unbelievable ideas and talent that is all across our nation. Now, contrary to what people think about as a massive reduction in funding, I just want to caution people of how they read about these things too. There's a moment for us to think about, there is a process that is typically, what plays out in terms of funding. And the funding is appropriated by one entity called the United States Congress. Okay. And if you look at the funding of NSF for the fiscal year 2026, it was $8.75 billion and maybe a 2% lower than what it was for the 2025 fiscal year. So I would not call it a huge shift in the funding landscape, and that would be true of most other agencies too, science agencies too. So I want to draw attention to the fact that there is sustained investment by Congress in terms of science, technology, innovation in our country, and talent that is exceedingly important for the future of competitiveness of our country. So yes, these are times where we need to start to think about federal government as not the investor, but an investor, an important investor. But we also need to look at other investors along with federal government to be able to unleash the ideas and talent across our nation. So I just wanted to make sure that I underscore that point. And so in sort of in a summary form, I will say that science, technology, innovation in our country is still continuing to advance. And yes, there are challenges. I would be remiss if I didn't say there are some challenges. I call them, bumps in the road rather than a sharp decline, as people tend to think about it.
Thank you. So let's think about a very specific example. During your tenure, you launched the Technology Innovation and Partnership Directorate. That was the first new directorate, as I recall, at the NSF in 30 years. So congratulations for that. But it was really to move discoveries toward commercialization and spread innovation geographically. What's its status now, and how resilient will it be to the current political environment?
Very good question, Tammy. So let me address the backdrop to the Technology Innovation Partnerships Directorate conceptualization. I would say that it is essentially the experiences that I've had in Arizona
Mhm.
as a Chief Research and Innovation Officer at ASU and partnering with the community, partnering with entities like Flinn and others, partnering with other research institutions, and partnering with industry and nonprofits and so on, advancing the overall thematic topics that's of great interest for that particular region. Having gone into NSF, I said, how might we do that at a national scale? What might be the ways in which we can advance these ideas that is everywhere? I strongly believe that innovation is everywhere and opportunities, therefore, should also be everywhere. And how do you then configure these unbelievable innovation centers all across our country? And that was a fundamental reason for me launching this new Technology Innovation Partnerships Directorate. Now, what comes along with that is always and always when you can demonstrate the value of public investments in terms of what it does to the growth of economy, guaranteeing national security objectives, as well as the societal prosperity, then you know that there is more incentivization for public and the representatives in Congress who represent the public to be able to invest even more. And that was the rationale for me in putting this together, is to basically see how might we expand the portfolio of NSF's investments and its impact by seeing how we might garner more resources in addition to what we invest in discovery science. And sure enough, our budget increased by $1 billion that year after the launch of the Technology Innovation Partnerships Directorate. And that was a direct result of the fact that people could see that such a directorate could then make possible unbelievable innovation of idea, unbelievable unleashing of ideas, innovation, talent, all of that all across our country. So that's the point that I want to make, and the rationale for introducing the new directorate. And I would claim that it has been an extremely successful architecture as well as the outcome that came out of that. Now let's talk about the question that you asked, which is how is it doing? In fact, in the current environment, even if you look at the budget propositions that come from the president that came recently for 27, again, there's a significant reduction in the president's budget request, but Congress at the end of the day, ensures that the investments are appropriately made. But if you look at the overall sort of the trajectory of how things are being looked at, new technologies, these kinds of innovative programs are being emphasized and invested in. So therefore, TIP Directorate and its programs, I would expect will continue to have significant support and investments. And therefore, the unleashing of these kinds of regional innovation engines and other kinds of translational ideas will continue to be invested in. So I have no doubts about that.
That's terrific. That's good news. I want to play upon that innovation theme that you're talking about there. You've said innovation must happen everywhere for everyone. And other countries, China, India, the Gulf states, are investing aggressively in research infrastructure. So how much of the US advantage in science is structural, and how much it really depends on maintaining that federal investment?
Extremely important, because federal investment is what you typically have for high risk, high reward ideas. Let me give you some data points to support this. Now, at NSF, we are now in the 76th year, 75 years, the first 75 years since World War II, after World War II, when NSF was launched in 1950, NSF's investments have steadily been increasing, not dramatically, but steadily been increasing year over year. But if you look at the outcomes that have come out of that investment, 270 plus Nobel laureates that far, supported early in their career by NSF's investments. There is no agency on planet Earth, including other agencies in the United States, who have that kind of a track record of investing early in those kinds of fundamental ideas, resulting in these kinds of unbelievable, sort of the attestation of such ideas being celebrated, like the Nobel Prize and so on. I would argue that while 270 Nobel Prizes might have been won, probably there are hundreds and thousands of such ideas that have been made possible through NSF's investments. The second thing I would say, during the same 75-year journey, NSF has also invested early in companies like Google and Qualcomm and a whole host of companies. Thousands and thousands and thousands of companies invested in, or people invested in, who have then spun out those companies and ideas. So on all counts, those investments have really garnered tremendous amount of returns for the country. Now, back to you answering your question. Yes, countries like China are investing heavily because they see what has happened as a trajectory in the United States. Sustained investments do produce unbelievable outcomes. But we also have to keep something else in mind. If you look at the United States, the federal investments is 0.8% of the GDP of the country. A total of 3.5% of the GDP is actually invested in research and development in the United States, which means the other 2.7% is invested in by the private sector, foundations like Flinn, and other kinds of partners who invest in research and development. So let's not forget that it is a collective investments to the tune of 3.5% of the GDP that is made in science, technology, innovation, advancement in the United States. So more investments need to be made by federal government, no question about it. There is enough evidence to show that it produces significant outsized impact in terms of what those investments do to ideas and talent. Sure, okay? But there's also, I think at this time, we need to think about the models, namely that the private sector investments, in addition to the federal investments, and other investments that are made in addition to the federal investments, they all need to be synergized in a way that we are able to get even more value for the public invested dollar. Okay? And so this is a moment for us to not only look at the competition and saying, let's invest more. Yeah, that's always good. But even more important, I would argue, is how do you take those investments and make good with them even more than what we have done in the past? While the track record is great, we can do even better. And I'm very happy to see, for example, the infrastructure investments in AI, which is my own research area for the last 35, 40 years, infrastructure investments made by companies in a very, very significant way, NVIDIA, Google, and others, right? Now, how do you then make sure that such investments are also made available for researchers in universities, laboratories, and so on, national labs, and so on, so that we are able to advance the ideas in addition to what the federal government might be able to do in terms of their own investments in these kinds of infrastructure and people?
So I love the theme of synergy and collaboration. And one of the things that came out of our refresh of the Biosciences roadmap is the idea of, reinvigorating that collaborative gene. So let's turn to Arizona specifically and, talk about, we've got 3 public universities, independent research institutions, and several, active, research health systems. So relative to the roadmap's goal of becoming a nationally recognized bioscience leader by 2030, what's the most important thing that these institutions need to do together that they're not doing right now?
I'm going to tell you the top 3 things.
Okay.
Partnership, partnership, and partnership.
Got it.
Okay. So basically, I find that we have unbelievably sort of world-class institutions in our state, Arizona State University, University of Arizona, NAU, and then other universities in the state, the Maricopa Community College system. There are unbelievable institutions in our state. That institutions which are high research performing institutions, world-class by any standards. And then we have got unbelievable research groups that are advancing ideas, whether it is AI or quantum or new materials or biotech, all kinds of emerging ideas. So the question is, how do we make sure that we have the spirit of partnership, that then essentially 1 + 1, as it is proverbially said, is not 2, but 3, 4, and 5, because we're able to synergize our mission, our objectives, our resources, and our talent, all of that, so that we might then produce an outsized sort of outcomes than what would be possible if we all individually move forward. Nothing wrong with the individual accomplishments that should continue. That is absolutely necessary, but I would say it is not sufficient. So in Arizona, I think being a smaller state compared to California and New York and others, we've got a unique opportunity here. We know each other very, very well. Oftentimes we're just 2 hours drive here and there, and we're able to meet each other. We're able to get together. And now in this virtual form, it makes it even easier. So I think the amount of capacity that is there, the amount of ideas and talent that is available in Arizona, we can do amazing things. And I always think of Arizona as not just comparing it with other states, but with other countries like Singapore. I was talking to the head of the Science, Technology, Innovation agency in Singapore yesterday. He called me up and we were having a chat. And I was telling him that, when I look at Arizona, I look at Arizona as Singapore or Ireland or countries like that, because we can do amazing things because of the bringing together of all the assets of the state and making it to work, whatever the thematic area might be. And in this case, the bioscience is an excellent example of that. So when you talk about the hospital system, I mean, my God, in 5 years, when I was in Washington, I come back, I see amazing institutions have emerged here, new medical schools are emerging here. It's really exciting to see that, right? I mean, there's so much happening here, and the Wild West is really wild. And so it's amazing. So that's what we need is, you see TSMC here, you see the amazing semiconductor company expansion here in every way. There's a lot of activities that's going on here. And so when you look at that, you say, that's fantastic, but if only we can see how we can bring them all together and we work together even more. And people accuse me that I'm an optimist, but I would rather take that. And so I feel that the future is very bright. But to again go back to your fundamental question of what it takes us to be intentional about partnering. It takes intensity in terms of ensuring that those partnerships, when working together, delivers, really, really world-class outcomes. So I'm very confident about that, but I would strongly encourage all institutions to get to know each other, partner more, and get away from the silos, which I think is already happening, but maybe it has to happen at a much faster pace, speed, as well as a scale.
Well, that would certainly reinvigorate the collaborative gene. So we're totally in favor of that. That's about the intentional partnership of institutions, but you founded the Center for Cognitive Ubiquitous Computing at ASU. And that's focused, as I understand it, on assistive technologies. So how should Arizona be thinking about kind of the intersection of AI, health technology, and the state's aging population as a research strength? Is there a way to integrate those as well?
Oh, absolutely. Because, every place, and get back to the regional innovation engines of the TIP directorate at NSF, that was premised on the fact that every region finds their secret sauce, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of trying to replicate what happens in some other parts of the country and try to, immigrate that to your place, why not create something that is so natural for what is going on in your environment? And clearly, we are a semiconductor mecca, if you may. I mean, we have got this 50-year history or more of semiconductor activities here. And now you can obviously, there's tremendous credibility for pursuing that and moving that forward. Now, you talked about the fact, and it has been always a destination for retirees. And therefore, why would not you look at aging as a theme here? Obviously. Yeah. Now, over the years, with ASU's Biodesign Institutes, U of A's Bio5, and other activities across the state, the Alzheimer's Institute, the Parkinson's Institute, I can go on naming all of this, right? And the unbelievable activities in research also in Mayo Clinic and so on, and that's expanded. So when you bring together the collective assets of all of that, right, around these thematic topics of whether it is healthy aging or whether it is AI in context, I call it AI plus X. That is AI for health. Okay, so how might you find those thematic topics that nobody will ever ask the question, why Arizona, right? Why Arizona for solar? Obvious, right? When photons are shooting at our surface at a much more rapid rate than any other part of the country, clearly you would want to develop all of the solar activities here, right? That's a pretty obvious thing. And then we have a lot of assets in terms of natural resources, right? And we've got mining companies like Freeport-McMoran and others. So in this age of critical minerals and so on and so forth, clearly there are opportunities to leverage that. And then you look at Palo Verde, for example. I mean, you talk about the nuclear plant, and now we are talking about small modular reactors. Where would that then be more successful? Clearly, we have got a case study here where we have been working with nuclear power. So I can go on and on and on and talk about the individual assets that we have in Arizona, which makes us naturally competitive, naturally being able to leverage those assets and do a lot more into the future. So I see AI plus X, some AI plus X, quantum, semiconductor, the device manufacturing, those kinds of assets that we have here, and nuclear, for example. And there's assets like that I think we can really leverage on and do some amazing things. And to special populations that you point out, like the aging population, now if you can provide healthy aging solutions, and I see a number of startups starting to develop in this area, right? Healthy aging, and I think that's a fantastic context for us to do a lot more. And again, on the Arizona Bioscience Roadmap, when you talk about entrepreneurial activities, this clearly is something that we can pursue and stand out. And the work that was done at TGen and others, in terms of all the way from genomics to the advanced technologies, on-body, in-body sensing and wearables and so on, clearly we can make a big impact in that domain.
Absolutely. I love that aging can be a strategic advantage. So thanks for that. Looking forward. Quantum computing, biotech, advanced manufacturing. NSF has identified all of those as critical areas. But which one do you think Arizona has the most unrealized potential in? And why would you think that?
No, these are all, not only NSF has identified it, it is national priorities, right? This is a national roadmap of technologies, I think, that they can be really, really good at. So when I look at that from the point of pure technology, I mean, there are applications like water and other kinds of things that we have not even talked about. There are applications and solution spaces where we can be unique because we have the context here. But you talked about technology. So in the technology space, for example, clearly we have got semiconductor activities here and the manufacturing, advanced manufacturing activities here, building of devices here. So clearly quantum and all the things that comes about in quantum sensing, quantum computing, quantum networking, communication, from the device manufacturing perspective, clearly there are assets here that we can leverage and see what we can do more of. There are AI assets here which can be leveraged to see how we can do quantum AI. Now we have got an engineering research center in U of A in quantum networking, for example. We have got assets in quantum in ASU in terms of research. And so clearly there is a convergence. What I would say is where Arizona can stand out is the convergence of some of these technologies and building the fusion of some of those rather than the individual technologies themselves, where we can really leap forward through what we can do, whether it is for a biomedicine application or for a healthy application or for water or other kinds of applications. You can see how the convergence of these can be core technology builds, but also the application of the technologies to those domains can make this even more appropriate, relevant, and can be impactful.
Yeah, that's right. You mentioned AI before, and the idea of taking these different areas and applying them. AI is reshaping the practice of research itself. I mean, we see it in the biosciences from drug discovery to material science. Where do you think the US is genuinely ahead? And where is it at the risk of falling behind because of, say, underinvestment in the computational infrastructure that supports AI-driven research?
So before I get to the question, one major strength that I missed mentioning, which I always talk about, is the aerospace industry.
Yes.
Right? Very
Especially in
vibrant in
Arizona.
Arizona. Very vibrant in Arizona. And again, that brings convergence of technologies, different kinds of technologies. And, another time we can talk about that. But back to your question on AI. See, despite all the comments you hear about AI and, what will happen to workforce and this and that, before I get to that, still the rest of the world looks to United States as the leader in core AI technologies. Whether it is the chipsets, the GPUs, the processors, whether it is even the software, some even applications, If you look at this, if you name the top 10 companies in AI, okay, you know the answer if United States is in the leadership role. That's a given. Okay, we are and we have been, and this is not just, it doesn't happen just overnight. It's been a sustained effort and built over several years, and that's why we are where we are. Okay, and newer companies in the last decade like OpenAI, Anthropic, and others have emerged now, and they are now pioneers and leaders in the global arena. So that's one space that we are very, very strong. Now, what's happening also at the same time is how might we take that advantage, strategic advantage that we have, which is the accessibility to infrastructure, accessibility to data, right? When you talk about AI, it's about infrastructure, data, power, applications, software, right? All of this play a role in terms of successfully deploying and realizing the full potential of AI and being in the vanguard in terms of research, development, as well as deployment. So in those areas, I think clearly United States is in the lead. Having said that, we have competitors who are close behind, China being one of them, right? And so competition to me, I always say this, competition to me is a good thing because it motivates us to do even better, run even faster, okay? And that's where we are right now, is we are configuring ourselves to see how the competition motivates us, inspires us, nurtures us to see how we can do even better and faster so that we can still continue to be ahead of the curve. Now, this requires a lot of collective thinking. It requires, of course, federal investments. It requires policies. It requires incentives. It requires, of course, talent being, trained to be able to, engage in this new world order. And so all of that needs to happen. And so I see that, to answer your question again, in one word, we are still, in the lead, but we need to do a lot more to keep the lead into the future.
That's great. I really appreciate your sense of optimism in all of these answers. We have just a couple minutes left for this chat. So final question, as I'm looking through the participants today, we have university administrators, some hospital executives, policymakers, business leaders. What is the single most important thing that the leaders in this audience can do in the next 12 months that you believe will strengthen Arizona's position in bioscience research?
Pick up the phone, talk to people, not necessarily in your sector.
Okay.
Arrange small group events to share thoughts and ideas and expertise. Learn from each other and start to co-create things for larger problems, sets that needs to be solved. Find the problems, solve them, and bring your collective investments together. Investments, I don't mean just money, infrastructure, people, everything together. And if you do that in the next 12 months, I can tell you, we'll be in a hyper productivity mode in Arizona. I think all of us are so comfortable in our own sort of home domains that getting in a car or even getting on a Zoom call, we don't have to get in a car, but getting into a car or getting on a Zoom call, but reaching out to somebody that you do not know. One of the first things that I did when I went to NSF, the first 2 weeks, I picked up the phone and I called every other agency leader, NIH, Department of Energy, Department of Commerce, DARPA, and others. The reason I did that is because I felt that the moment I can bring the other agencies with NSF, then we can do a lot more together rather than NSF charting its own trajectory without understanding and without planning to see how we can bring the visions together to see how we can all work towards the national landscape of advancing science, technology, innovation. So I propose the same kind of an idea here. This is all about hyper partnering and, distance agnostic. We are very, very small state relative to, many other states. So it's easy to, drive, pick up the phone, get on a Zoom call. And so I would encourage, if I may leave with this thought, Tammy, entities like the Flinn Foundation and the Arizona Board of Regents, who are amazing people, who are always constantly working on bringing people together between the 3 universities, right? Entities like that are powerful entities, and they can bring people together. They can bring entities together and see how we can create that future that we all want for Arizona.
great. I love the concept of hyper partnering. So I hope you'll hold us accountable to that. Panch, we've really appreciated your time here today. We know how valuable it is, and just thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Tammy and
Back
Jennifer.
to you, Jennifer.
All right. Thank you, Tammy and Punch. What an amazing inspirational message. And hyper partnering is my new word of the day. So, with that, let's turn to the industry side of the picture. I'm pleased to introduce Christine Mackey, President and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Economic Council, who will moderate a discussion about what recent developments mean for Arizona's biosciences trajectory. Chris will be joined by three people with distinct vantage points in the sector: Mara Aspinall, partner at Illumina Ventures; Jacob Bush, Director of Business Development at the Translational Genomics Research Institute; and Nigel Pinto, R&D Director at West Pharmaceutical Services. Chris, take it away.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks so much. And thanks for having us here today. Really excited for the conversation and getting some input from these great industry leaders. So Mara, we're going to jump right in here and really talk about what's going on and what we see here in the market. So Mara, not to put you on the spot, I'm gonna start with you if you're okay with that. You were president and CEO of Ventana Medical Systems and now Roche Tissue Diagnostics with more than 1,700 employees in Southern Arizona. What made that growth possible in Tucson, and what does Roche's continued investment there tell us about what Arizona offers to a global company?
Well, I am so proud of my time as CEO of Ventana, now Roche Tissue Diagnostics. And I want to be cautious. While I'm happy to speak about the ecosystem, I'm not speaking today as Roche. So I left there a little while ago. So, but what it says, I think, are two things. One is Roche Ventana in and of itself is an Arizona success story, a global company that huge, that started here with strong connections to the University of Arizona and continued to expand here. So not just, I'm very proud that it's in Tucson, but I think that alone says a lot about Arizona. The continuing investment by Roche and others in the ecosystem. You spoke about 1,700 plus employees in Southern Arizona, but the ecosystem that supports Roche is even larger than that, and that continues to grow. But what it says to me is that we have a strong workforce, and that is critical for companies to grow, that people are already here and they're able to hire senior people, mid-level people, and entry people, as well as the fact that so many of the hires that Roche makes here and around the world, I presume still exists, means that Tucson and Arizona is a place that people want to be. And that helps hiring and makes a tremendous difference. So all of that comes together to say Southern Arizona, all of Arizona are great places for bioscience companies to thrive and grow.
Well, and Mara, I think you brought up such a great point there. It's not just about and I'll use the academic development word prime company that's there. It's the economic multiplier of all the jobs that they support and additional jobs that they bring in and really stretch that workforce and help that workforce grow in other areas. So you make such a great point about it's not just the 1,700 jobs. I would venture to guess it's probably 3 times that amount or 4 times that amount as to what Roche really supports in the ecosystem.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And from a workforce point of view, there's also a multiplier there because it brings spouses, whom many of which have this, same strength and industry work, and it brings kids that can go to our public and some of our private schools.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of the things I love best about my job, building a community.
Yes.
So, Jacob, I'm going to move on to you. And TGen has spun out, and this is one of my favorite parts that I always get to say. TGen has spun out about 20 companies over the last decade. And some of those spin outs attracted major companies to Arizona, like Caris Life Sciences and Exact Sciences, and now Abbott acquiring Exact Sciences. How does TGen's business development model work today? and what changed about the environment for translating research into commercial investments in commercial ventures in Arizona?
Yeah, also a thing that I love to talk about. So the model still starts with discovery, but a discovery in a lab is still several steps away from a product that impacts patients. And that's where teams like our Enterprise Directed Programs group comes in. EDP works with our researchers to take findings and ask, how do we make this work at scale in a clinical setting? Also asking, can you run this 1,000 times a day? Sometimes that results in us licensing this out to a diagnostic company. Sometimes we develop technologies internally where we just launched rapid whole genome sequencing diagnostic for heme malignancies as a clinical service through our CLIA lab recently. And sometimes that internal development becomes a spin-out company that we incubate, which is how stories like the ones you just described get started. But what I really want to emphasize is how much the environment has changed for TGen specifically being part of City of Hope has been transformative. We now have direct line to physicians who tell us where the gaps are in clinical care, what tests don't exist, what tools they need. That feedback loop makes our commercialization smarter and focus on clinical need. And then at the sector at large, it's a completely different landscape. When TGen arrived at the PBC, it was largely empty, and now there are over 20 organizations on that campus, universities, health systems, biotech, and hundreds of biomedical entities across the state. So that density changes everything. It's the build it and they will come thesis playing out in real time.
Well, Jacob, you should also know that when we talk about you, about TGen, when you talked about it was largely empty, we do call TGen our Adam of Adam and Eve of our kind of our biosciences in Phoenix. So we do give you that credit as to kind of that launch pad that gave us over these years that street cred and things that happen. I think it's also important to note as you've grown, it's not just been in Arizona, here in Phoenix. It's you're doing work in NAU and you're doing work in Scottsdale and you're doing work all over the state and let alone where your companies are spinning out to. I got to write a piece for A New Way to City day before yesterday, and TGen plays, of course, a large component of that and what you've driven here. So I would dare say we wouldn't be where we're at in the roadmap had TGen not made the decision that it made back in the day. You're one of our bragging rights.
We
So,
appreciate that. Thank you, Chris.
Nigel, I'm gonna move on to you. And West Pharmaceutical Services has a long time presence in Arizona and has multiple facilities across Greater Phoenix. How does a global company like West think about its Arizona operations as part of its overall innovation and manufacturing strategy?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think you got to, yes, it's a long time presence, but you got to remember that it happened through an acquisition. So West came into Arizona 20 plus years ago because of a competency need as we were trying to strategically grow into the drug delivery space or med device, med tech, right? So it's important as we talk about why somebody comes into the valley or why somebody stays in the valley. We came in for the competency. What's happened over time is for West, Arizona plays a neat and therefore compelling landscape of an R&D center and operations, and then even logistics based on our partners that we have built over the last couple of decades here. So whenever something new comes up in terms of are we trying to launch out a new product or work through expansion, Arizona's front and center and stays in that conversation. It's happened because we've been able to leverage talent and then also grow capability within the region. So the key thing, though, is integrating that into something like what's happening here at a site-wide or a valley-wide level. Where we are challenged right now is we're doing it ourselves. How do we commit and bring that to the rest of the valley so we can continue to increase the foothold for both the organization and then the valley in standard?
Nigel, there's when it comes to number one is you had me at Arizona's first in your conversation. So right there, you had me. I was all set right there. But when you talk about I love what you're saying at the end and talking about as you're looking at doing new things and as you're looking at those competencies and as you're looking at those things that you're looking at how you bring those whole things together. But how they really affect all of Arizona. It's not just about one location, but where you could be doing this activity all over Arizona. And you mentioned workforce and the quality of the workforce. So I'm gonna stick with you on that next question, if you don't mind. You know, you're a leading R&D, product development, and sustainable engineering at West. That's what you're known for. When you're hiring engineers and operation professionals for your Arizona facilities, to what extent are you finding them in Arizona, and where are our gaps?
Yeah, so I'd answer that question twofold. Because again, what brought West and what has ensured West has had a credible presence in the Valley has been its manufacturing capability around a niche space with injection molding and automation. So historically, we've always had the ability to create a pipeline of talent, whether that's individually through our own training systems or partnering with the Maricopa Community College system or even the universities, ASU, UFA, NAU. Where we're starting to see a gap now is those niche industries or niche competencies are starting to go out of fashion, if you will. And so we are creating this gap, whereas the experienced workforce is starting to retire, there's nobody coming in to fill the pipeline, right? And so more recently, I think Dr. Punch spoke about it, where we need to collaborate. We need to all get together because if one company is having the problem, it's likely everybody's having the problem. And so with these niche trade skills around manufacturing or automation, how can we build education curricula that gets people in the door and work through it, right? So that's one element on the trade. In terms of the R&D side or product development or staffing, I think there we have a lot of talent through the universities with four-year programs. We've got a lot of good graduate level programs as well as doctorates coming through. The challenge there that we see is it's all in isolation, right? So we have somebody that's great at product development, but they don't know the regulatory landscape to get something into the market. And so for that, we need to go external, outside of state, maybe to a different West facility or with a third party, right? And so how can we continue to evolve and grow so that as an organization, the overhead is not spread out, but we can collaborate internally. And that's something we've always looking to partner with universities to build that talent pipeline. But then also if we can collaborate with other companies and create that ecosystem, I think that's an opportunity for us to evaluate and look into.
Well, and Nigel, you almost wonder if, you know, on those niche skills that you have, that you either have to go to another West facility or out of the market. And to your point, people are retiring, they're changing professions, they're doing whatever. The retirement numbers I've seen in certain industries are staggering. We're working on some bio training programs that are here, and you wonder, could we all be partnering together with our universities and our community colleges to have those add-on training programs in those really specialized areas that you need, that we could partner with our companies. You said if West is facing it, others must be as well. Could we partner with them to create training programs that you've finished your bioengineering, but you need this skill in this area? Could we create some certification programs to start making sure that bio workforce is there? I think there's a there to what you said.
Yeah, it's the way forward. Otherwise, we'll all be stuck on our own little island, right? So it's the way forward for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And Mara, I'm going to switch over to you because you also talked about workforce in the first question that we just had together. So now thinking about your vantage point as an investor, how do you think about Arizona as a source of talent at the PhD or MD and technician levels relative to what a maturing biosciences ecosystem needs?
Well, it's easy to say it's all about the universities and the critical role that our universities play. Panch spoke about that, and it becomes increasingly important in this highly competitive environment to get the best students. But I think there's another aspect of this that is critical, which is getting the best faculty. And, much of our faculty is homegrown, but certainly not all of it. We want to bring new people in. And in the competitive grant environment, we want to bring people in who can and will get money and grants to bring in. to the area. And then we can't forget, as I said earlier, the importance of K through 12 public education. But how is it perceived? And I think we'll talk a little bit more about this as well. Frankly, more could help. ASU has done a great job, and I see some people smiling about that. ASU has done a great job, and full disclosure, I am a professor of practice at ASU in being named top innovative university. I think it's 6 years in a row. We need to get the word out about the strength of our universities, ASU, U of A, NAU, but frankly, other colleges and others, educational institutions within our ecosystem. Everyone that a bioscience company hires is not all PhDs. A lot of very senior people, but not all. And if you look nationally, not enough people know the strength of our universities. So I think that that's one piece that I know Flinn has talked about with the bioscience roadmap in the past, is the importance of telling the story about the strength of our universities moving forward. And I think that that would help with the local community of people feeling proud and saying, I want to stay here, and those outside of Arizona understanding the strength that is created here.
Well, and Mara, you said a mouthful just right then. We just had this conversation with Flinn yesterday about GPEC and Flinn, and the GPEC and Flinn and Phoenix at Work are looking at how do we bring some of those programs together so people realize they can say, because it's that chicken or egg. Do you have the workforce that brings the companies? But you need the companies to have jobs for the workforce. So it's this chicken or egg. And we're going to be bringing a roundtable together here later this month. A shameless plug for anyone who's on this meeting and wants to join the roundtable. Please let us know. But exactly to talk about that. What skills are we missing? What skills do we need? What are those what are those what are those +1 programs that we could be adding on? So you're exactly right that the roadmap speaks to it. And that's one of the where GPEC and Flinn and Phoenix at Work have been partnering is really focusing on exactly that, because we're no longer in that point in our market where we can say that we're we're a teenager, we're a toddler, and so we don't have these things. We're really a formidable market that needs to be taken seriously.
That is exactly right throughout Arizona. And I do believe we've also talked about this in the roadmap, that we can't be all things to all people, even with our large size, and to focus on the 3 to 5 areas for the next 3 to 5 years that are our core strengths that we can do better than anybody else in the country, maybe the world, and then move on to another 3 to 5 areas where we can say we are number one, and therefore this is the place to be.
Absolutely agreed with you. Jacob, I'm gonna move back to you. TGen, of course, is a part of the City of Hope. How does that affiliation shape the talent TGen can attract to Phoenix? And what does that experience tell you about what we might expect in terms of workforce dynamics when other national and global firms arrive in Arizona?
Yeah, so being part of City of Hope has changed our recruiting pitch in a meaningful way. We went from being a highly respected but independent research institute to being part of an ecosystem with patients at the center, informing discovery of one of the nation's top NCI designated cancer centers. That opens doors that weren't open before, particularly with physician scientists. These are people who want to do research and see their work provide better outcomes for patients than what standard of care can provide today. And the City of Hope affiliation gives them a path to do both in Arizona. The bigger point for this audience is what the signals is more of a national and global brands establish a presence here. Every anchor institution that arrives creates a talent and gravity effect. People are seeing Phoenix as a place where this can happen. And once they're here, the quality of life, the cost of living relative to Boston or the Bay Area, and the collaborative culture tend to keep them. Calling back to what Panch said earlier, Arizona isn't a place where people compete in silos. There's a real willingness to work across institutions, and that's attractive to talent. Each new arrival makes it easier for the next one to recruit. And as the talent base grows, it becomes more compelling for the next company to land. And that flywheel is already turning in the Valley.
Jacob, I'm telling you, talent and gravity effect. Those are my new words. I'll credit you, I promise, but You're exactly right. I mean, that's the whole point, is that we build enough critical mass that it seems like such a logical place to be. So I'm gonna jump. We've got about 5 minutes left. So I'm gonna ask you one more question on that, a different front, but thinking about challenges that you face when TGen commercializes a discovery. What's your biggest barrier to keeping the company in Arizona rather than see it relocate to Boston or San Francisco? And this one's near and dear to my heart, as you can imagine.
Right. And it's kind of related, right? I think the honest answer right now is capital. The science is here, the talent is increasingly here, the cost structure is favorable, but when a spin out needs serious investment or becomes an attractive M&A for a larger company, the pull outside of Arizona is real. And that's not because investors can't write a check remotely, but because the density of specialized life science capital in those markets creates an ecosystem around the company. Follow-on funding, board expertise, operational talent for scaling, founders feel that pull away. And that said, I think it's worth broadening the picture a bit because not every deal that goes out of state is a loss for Arizona. A lot of what TGen and other research institutions commercialize gets licensed or acquired by companies headquartered elsewhere. And that can actually be how you grow the ecosystem. As we called out earlier at the beginning, we've seen this play out firsthand. A company that acquires or licenses the technology may end up establishing a presence here, hiring here, expanding here. So the research becomes an anchor that pulls industry in. And the long game is that as Arizona's bioscience density keeps growing, more of those acquirers or licensees are going to be already be here. And that's when you start seeing the full life cycle stay in state. So yes, we need more local capital, and that's critical, but we should also recognize that every technology we commercialize is building that gravity that makes Arizona harder to leave.
And I'm going to go to my last question, and this one's for each of you in turn. So let's start with Mara, and then Jacob, and then Nigel. What's the one thing the audience that's on with us today, researchers, entrepreneurs, executives, policymakers, should do differently starting tomorrow to accelerate the trajectory we've been talking about, that we've come from and where we're going to? Mara?
I had to be first on this one. Well, I'm going to go first to what Ponce said, which is partner. Partner with somebody to make something that you have an idea bigger. But I'm going to take from that idea is think about the big ideas. I think a lot of what we've had in the past have been incremental ideas. How can we, as an ecosystem, work with each other and the existing companies to make bigger ideas? So I think it's a big thing to say, create a new company. Probably not realistic for most people. But are there some big ideas that existing companies, small and large, you can work with them to get to a bigger, to create a bigger idea and a bigger initiative in the state?
Jacob, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll be brief because I think it's connected here, but partnership, but I think in the context of partnership is thinking about commercialization up front. If you're a researcher, focus on clinical need and then the commercial potential there. And then engaging, this goes back to kind of the partnership side of things, but engaging individuals who can speak into study design so that the aims include some validation or proof of concept for commercial value. So really building that commercial lens in from the start through partnerships, through conversations. And those partnerships can look at, partnering with industry, right? Understanding what industry needs or partnering with physicians. So coming back to that, I think the commercialization connected to partnerships.
Nigel, bring us home.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, the foundation is set. We have the roadmap with the Flinn Foundation and the Bioscience roadmap. The key thing there is the co-creation bit, and I think in our own individual lanes across research, academia, industry, we're all great at what we're doing. But how do we pause and stop saying, how can I contribute? How can I pitch in? But rather say, what am I doing already today that can compound, right? I think sometimes when we look at this, we say we need to do something more, but scaling a system or an ecosystem for that matter is all about meeting at the right intersection point, right? Meeting at the right connection point. And so maybe visibility into what we're doing and then finding that connection versus trying to still create something more. I think in isolation, it all exists. It's about connecting it all together.
Well, I could spend my whole afternoon talking to you guys. I have a bunch more questions, but we're limited by time here. So I thank you all so much for being here with us today, and to the Flinn Foundation for allowing us to have this great conversation. And Jennifer, back to you.
All right. Well, thank you. What an exciting conversation. Thank you so much, Chris, and all our panelists, and Tammy and Punch for an excellent conversation. And thank you to all of you who have joined us for this event. We do wish we had time to respond to questions that these segments elicited, but be sure that the Flinn staff has captured the chat and will follow up as possible. So, a reminder, the new progress report and the full Biosciences roadmap are available at flinn.org/current progress altogether. You can also scan the QR code on the screen and look for an email with a link to the recording of this event and to these resources. With that, thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate your time and your commitment to Arizona's bioscience future. Let's all get together and become hyper-connected. Thank you and good day.